Hello, I'm Pastor Ben Miller. Welcome to our lessons on prayer. This is lesson 5, and what we're going to look at today is as we examine prayer, is that prayer is relational. And so the question we're going to ask is, what does a relationship with God look like? What does our relationship, how should that look in prayer to God? And where I want us to go today to get an idea or an example of this is Genesis 18 with Abraham. Now here in 18, we actually have the Lord coming to Abraham. Him and 2 other men, who are angels, they come walking down the road. Abraham sees them. Abraham knows who this is, and he prepares a meal for God, and they eat with him, and that's where God confirms his promise to him. And Sarah laughs because, I'm not supposed to have any children, and God's saying I'm going to have I'm going to have a child in a year. And then after that is where we're going to pick up in 16. And so I just want to take note to the relational aspect that Abraham has with God. He eats with him. He actually prepares food for him. He sacrifices to provide food, right? He gives of his own food, right? It costs Abraham something to feed God. And they converse, and then we're going to pick up at 16. So 16 of 18, then the men set out from there, and they looked down toward Sodom. And Abraham went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring Abraham what he has promised to him." Then the Lord said, "Because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know." Now, just take note here. God is speaking to Abraham, so he sends these 2 men off to Sodom and Gomorrah. And essentially, what is he telling Abraham? He's telling Abraham, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of their sin. Why? Because God says what? I have chosen Abraham. Abraham's special. Abraham's going to teach his children my ways and my laws. And they're going to teach their children my ways and my laws. And ultimately, through Abraham, all the nations will be blessed. And we see that come true in Jesus. In Jesus, all the nations are blessed. And so, Abraham has found a special place in God's eye. And that's true for believers too. And God may not come down physically with us and speak to us, but we actually have something that Abraham didn't have. We have the completed work of Scripture. God speaking to us. And my question to you is, do you listen when God speaks? Do you have that type of relationship where you seek to know what God has to say? Because Abraham could have just chose to pretty much ignore what God said and part ways right here. But notice Abraham doesn't. Why? Well, Abraham actually knows someone who lives in Sodom. And that would be his nephew. And so Abraham, and that's going to be a topic later, but we see Abraham interceding on behalf of his nephew Lot. But what I really want us to focus on is how Abraham does that. The relational aspect that Abraham does this. Abraham doesn't just say, "Lord, please save Lot." No, notice how he does this. So the men turned from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham still stood before the Lord. Notice first here that Abraham is where? He's standing before the Lord. I believe in kneeling and praying, but there's different postures, prayer postures in Scripture. But just notice the main point is Abraham is before the Lord. How often do you get alone before the Lord to talk things out with God? Then Abraham drew near and said, notice, what does Abraham do? He draws near to God. Do you attempt to draw near to God? Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Notice again, Abraham doesn't just say, "Hey God, save Lot, and now I got work to do." He's actually going to reason with God. Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? And so Abraham is appealing to God, who is just, who is good, who is righteous, to do the right thing, to not punish good people with evil. Because Abraham says what? I know you, God. You're not that kind of God. How does Abraham know that? Because he's listened to God before. And again, how do we know God's character? How can we know how to pray? We have to know what God said. And that is in the Word. So, Abraham continued, the Lord, and the Lord said, if I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will spare the whole place for their sake. And so God returns to Abraham and he says, or speaks to Abraham, says, well, you're right, Abraham. I'm not going to destroy the whole place if there's 50 people righteous. Abraham answered and said, behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. I am but dust and ashes. Notice Abraham's humility. I am but dust and ashes. This is not false humility. You know, I know people like that verse, and rightfully so, that talks about going into the presence of God with boldness. The only reason we can have boldness, and I would say Abraham is bold here in what he's asking, is because of who God is, not because who we are. And Abraham understands he has no right to ask this of God, but he understands who God is and how merciful and great God is. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5? And he said, I will not destroy it if I find 45 there. Again he spoke to him, and suppose 40 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 40, I will not do it. Notice, Abraham is working him down. Why, Abraham, not just come out and say, please save Lot? I mean, isn't that how are our prayer requests most of the time? Dear Lord, so-and-so is sick, please save them. Dear Lord, so-and-so is going through a hard time, you know what's going on. Abraham is very pacific, and he's actually trying to reason with God like you'd have a conversation with somebody. He's trying to convince God, or really remind God in a convincing way, that God is righteous, that God is kind, and that Lot is righteous, and it would not be right or fair to destroy Lot. And he's using logical argument to get there. When's the last time you've done that with God? Really laid out your case to God. When you go to the bank and you ask them for a loan, do you not lay out your case as to why you have a loan? Or you just say, hey, I want a loan. And they're like, okay, we'll give it to you. Is that how that works? No, the bank wants to know certain things. What's your credit score? How much money do you have saved up? So just keep that in mind. Oh, let not the Lord be angry. Then he said, oh, let the Lord not be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 are found there. He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. He said, behold, I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20. I have undertaken to speak to the Lord. That's a big deal, and Abraham knows it. Behold, suppose 20 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, oh, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak again but this one. Suppose 10 are found there. He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And the Lord went his way, when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. It's just a beautiful transaction here between God and Abraham, where Abraham's really pleading with God. God shows his patience and mercy, and Abraham shows his caringness and respect to who God is. And we also get a glimpse into God's character here too, don't we? Absolutely. God does not destroy the wicked with the righteous. He shows mercy. And hopefully you get some insight about how to pray during this time of quarantine and the coronavirus. We need to actually reason with God. Because we say as believers, it's all about a relationship with Jesus. I have a relationship. Don't tell me about all this other stuff in the Bible. Well, wait a minute. What is your prayer life like? Because your prayer life represents your relationship with God. When I go through the drive-thru at McDonald's and ordered, I wouldn't say that I have a relationship with the person taking my order. I wouldn't even really say they're an acquaintance. But how often is that how we treat God? God, I would like my burger and fries to go. Make it quick. Make it snappy. Oh, I went to church this week, so that should be a good payment. You know, I was a good little boy this week, so give me what I want. You don't treat your wife that way. At least I hope you don't treat your wife that way. I mean, sure, I'm married, and sometimes I'll ask my wife for her to do things for me. It'll be a short list, but the only reason she responds to that or doesn't hate me because I don't treat her like that all the time. You know, we talk through things. We reason through things. We're in the process of really thinking about building a house, so we have to talk out, layout and those things. We actually talk through those things. I don't just say I want this and go figure it out. That would be my tendency. No, we have to talk, we have to reason, we have to think, we go back and forth on things. And that's how it ought to be with God. God's not this computer that we just punch some numbers about what we want and He gives it to us. That's not how that works. Do you really have a relationship with God? Or are you just asking for what you want when you can't get it any other way? And that's really this quote I love that I have for you. This quote says, His, that is Jesus, prayer life is an expression of His relationship with His Father. He wants to be with the person He loves. So if our prayer lives are an expression with what our relationship with Jesus is like, how's your prayer life? Because if your prayer life is lacking or not existent, then what makes you think you have a relationship with Jesus? And if it's a poor prayer life, what makes you think you have a good relationship with Jesus? Do you just put in your order at the start, at the end of every day? Or do you really talk things out with God and ask Him things and reason with Him? I challenge you to really think on that. This is Pastor Ben Meller. Live long and prosper.